Welcome to my channel. My name is Jimmy. We have another story topic waiting for us. I won't keep you. Let's get started. Story 1 from user Mystery Peeps. Similarly, I have a friend who was headed to work when a guy who stole a huge gas truck, like one of those that they take out to work on lines with, and got on the highway going the wrong way. There was a police chase that had already involved going through the international airport, nearly hitting a jet loaded with passengers. At which point, I personally believe he should have been treated as a potential terrorist and handled as such. The car was totaled. They were still pulling out pieces of his body months later, which meant his wife didn't even get to bury all of him. He was 23, barely. He was 3 months shy of his second anniversary with his wife, with a year-old daughter and 2 stepchildren who thought he hung the moon. We just finished the murder trial. He was found guilty, and this was his 8th time with similar charges, evading police, stealing cars, etc., etc. Plus, it was the commission of a felony and DUI situation, so it was first-degree murder. There were a few factors playing into it. He wasn't offered a plea deal because the DA was out for blood. My friend's wife was there all the days of the trial, and he spent the entire time glaring at her, just staring her down entirely, and making comments about how her husband was obviously on drugs and not paying attention because everyone else got out of my way. He completely made it out to be Will's fault that he was killed in such a horrific way at 23. The victim's advocate had to get involved because it was bordering on harassment after a while. He also spent a long time in jail, whining to my FIL about how everyone was being uncool to him. The jail is ran by quite a few of the parents of people who knew and loved Will. Being uncool is probably the least of his worries. He did an interview after the trial, where he came off as the victim. It was awful to watch. He even demonized Will's wife by writing a fake letter for the reporter that he claimed she never bothered to respond to. It was never sent to her. At all. The first time she saw it was when I told her about the interview. They didn't even tell her about it. They made her look like the most heartless person, airing a snippet of an interview she did where she stated all that she wanted was for him to show some remorse. And by snippet, I mean she was cut off mid-sentence in the airing. And the following, it by reading this heartfelt, handwritten letter where he confessed how it haunted him, and he wished he could trade his life for Will's. But then, he immediately starts in on how it isn't fair that he was charged with first-degree murder, how he doesn't think he should have to go on parole at 60. He'll be lucky if he gets that. He's looking at life, and the only way he's getting parole is if his sentences are ran concurrently rather than consecutively. And how everything thinks he's just a bad guy, but he's not, because he only did it because he had a loved one die 3 days before, so he had to get high and steal the truck. Even though he had 8 previous charges for similar actions, it was trash. The whole thing still makes me angry. The only time he ever tries to seem remorseful is when the jury or public is watching. The rest of the time, he's about how nothing is fair and demonizing the widow whose husband he took away. She still can't go back to work because she was there when they notified her, and she relives it over and over whenever she walks through her office. I personally think she has a bit of PTSD because she doesn't like to be separated from any of her family members at all, and avoids quite a few things because she just can't handle it. And I don't blame her. She had to identify him. And let me tell you, there was nothing left. And then she had to plan his funeral and explain to his daughter, who had just reached a point of being very attached to her dad, why he wasn't coming home. And then she had to sit through the murder trial and see the pictures of his body presented to the jury, and be told everything that happened to him, exactly how he suffered, in clear detail, while the man who did that to him glared at her and called her names to his attorney, and then demonized her in the press. So yeah, that's probably the most unfair thing I've ever seen. Edit. Important detail I didn't mention. They actually scheduled the murder trial for the week of their anniversary, and the day of was the really gruesome day. She spent what would have been her 3rd anniversary looking at pictures of her husband's body and hearing how he died while this guy glared at her. And then 2 days later, the interview aired. Story 2 from user deleted. I hung out with a bunch of poor misfits in high school. We all wore hand-me-down clothes and qualified for free lunch at school and trash. Lots of single-parent families and government assistance. This one girl in my group complained more than anyone else about how her family was poor. She often didn't have a lunch, and so the other kids would all chip in and either give her money or share our own lunches. 2 of the kids we hung out with were twin brothers. Their mom was raising them, plus their older brother, all on her own because their dad was incarcerated. He finally got out when we were teens, and pretty much immediately ran off and refused to pay support too. Because of the circumstances, the boys started working to support their family really young. First doing odd jobs for folks and then getting real jobs as soon as they could. The 2 of them felt so sorry for this girl, they decided to surprise her for Christmas one year. They saved up what they could for months and bought her a brand new game system she'd been complaining about wanting. Meanwhile, she gave a few of us used games and books, obviously previously played, read by her, wrapped in tinfoil instead of gift wrap. And we all shrugged that off because, of course, she was poor. A couple weeks after that Christmas, the girl's parents decided to let her throw her first small party for her friends at their house. Her dad picked us all up in their brand new minivan and then drove us to their brand new house. After we arrived, we got introduced to her new puppy and then given the home tour, which included 5 bedrooms and a pool. Also notable was the girl's bedroom, where her new game system sat alongside 2 other recent systems. I found out later that her dad was an attorney and her mom was a medical assistant. Her parents' combined income was 3 to 4x what my family made in a year, much less our friends who had worked their asses off to buy her that game system. Her idea of being poor was based on her parents not buying her everything she wanted immediately. The reason she never had lunch money? She saved what her folks gave her to buy herself things instead, while mooching off kids who were on free lunch. The reason she always gave us used stuff as gifts? Because she would have her parents buy a bunch of stuff for her friends at holidays, then keep it for herself while giving us stuff she no longer wanted instead. I'll never forget the look on my friends' faces as they slowly realized that the person they'd worked to support out of sympathy was actually just a spoiled brat. ETA, RIP inbox, update by demand though. Afterward, we started gradually cutting her off. She flipped her shit and caused a bunch of drama with me, and at that point I dropped her. Other people continued to let her hang around, but throughout the next year, she continued to them over. By the time we finished high school, she had no friends at all. She's now 32 and never did anything useful with her life. I look her up every couple years, and it seems like her parents are still supporting her while she tries to get strangers on the internet to GoFundMe her rent. Without success. One of the twins sadly died not long after high school. He had a chronic health issue and probably didn't get as much treatment as he should have. His brother is still around and still the nicest guy. He's doing okay, all things considered. Story 3 from user Lucy Loves. I used to live at my boyfriend's parents' house in my 20s while we saved up. We were both animal lovers, and my chocolate lab, Savin, got to visit me. Stay at their house with me some nights, usually when his stepdad wasn't home. Savin usually stayed at a friend's house until I got back on my feet financially. It was shortly after my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and I had just started a new job. But the pay cycle had to kick in, so I was paycheckless for about 6 weeks. Commission. BF's stepdad was quite an evil person. He had a tantrum every night as he got ready for his Greyhound bus driving shift, screaming to the point where he got high-pitched from the amount of effort put into it. Usually that his food wasn't ready the moment he walked out, his shirt wasn't starched perfect, his noodles weren't soft enough, his shoes weren't shiny enough, really nitpicky stuff. He'd rarely direct his anger at us, but seemed to be just projecting it to objects. Upturn the dinner plate, throw the shampoo bottle, hit the wall. He did not hit his wife or stepson. Everyone pretty much ignored him, and my BF's mom would just usually look towards us and roll her eyes, like, here we go again. One day he came back home a few hours after he was supposed to be gone for the night, and Savin was there with me. He was just chilling at my feet and quite mellow. Now Savin was your typical chocolate lab. Happy-go-lucky, had never shown a bit of aggression towards anyone, and was very well trained as well. He walked at a heel and was hoping you'd throw whatever you have so he could fetch. So stepdad comes in, sees Savin, NBD, he pets him and compliments his behavior. Whew. Sigh of relief. Thought he'd be mad. Well, he starts up about something unrelated, and as he hits high-pitched squeal mode, he starts chucking objects. My dog is obviously agitated and stands up, but stays in front of me and starts to bark. Of course, this riles up SD, so he starts screaming at him and walks towards him like he's gonna kick him. Well, my dog proved he'd protect me. He lunged and became a whole different dog. He didn't make contact because I pulled his lead back, but we made a hasty exit. Of course, I hear him screaming from outside. He never wants to see that girl here again, and if he sees that dog, he's gonna shoot him, etc. Story 4 from user CPT Hammer. My wife was a live-in nurse for a 99-year-old lady with dementia before we got married. We weren't high school sweethearts, but knew each other in high school. I ran into her on one of her 1 day a week off, and we communicated by phone for the next 2 years, the other 6 days a week. Anytime the old lady had an event to go to, birthday party, funeral, interview for just being old lady, I was allowed to attend as a guest. Everything was fine until I proposed. Then I couldn't come to events anymore, and some weeks she couldn't have a day off. Well, this only took a few weeks of not having a single day off when my wife put in her resignation. My wife loved the old lady, and in swear half of our time was retelling old lady's stories, which were pretty bad as I recall. But by this time, old lady is now 101 years old when they parted ways. For us, we focused on our wedding, and my wife looked for other jobs that would be okay with taking a month off within a year of getting hired. Boom, date set. Invitation even sent to old lady. My wife sends a birthday card for old lady's 102. We find out she passed a week earlier. We go to funeral, and my wife is melancholy about not having stuck it out a few more months. On the day before the wedding, my wife stayed with family so we wouldn't see each other. A process server comes to issue a summons for court regarding old lady death. The server had to give it directly to her and said if I didn't tell where my wife was, he was going to our wedding to serve her. I chose to call the bluff. We had changed church locations due to inter-family conflict since invitations went out. I call my mother-in-law to inform her what was going on. Wedding day happens without a hitch. We honeymoon just fine and return to deal with this. The old lady's daughter was blaming her mother's death on my wife leaving. She wanted monetary compensation. We go to court, and judge determines that my wife did a retaliatory quit because she was forced to work 7 days a week, which was in her contract that it could happen. That 60 days notice was required to quit, but she only gave 30. The family was asking for pay for the replacement nurse who only worked 4 months, but they wanted payment until 60 days notice was given. Judge awarded them only the 4 months of employment. The replacement never had to work 7 days a week, and my wife never had to prior my proposal. So basically, my wife had to work for free for 4 months because of a clause in her contract that only required 2 months of notice before quitting. Fast forward to we both worked minimum wage and spent everything we had on the wedding. Months later, and we still couldn't pay. Eldest daughter was in her mid-80s, youngest daughter dies, that's who we owed the money to. Eldest daughter sues us again because we owe the estate. We lose again and now owe more because of court fees and interest, 10% determined by state law. We get another summons to a will reading. Youngest daughter was in charge of old lady estate, but never distributed anything. Eldest supposed she would die first, and was fine with youngest keeping everything. Eldest had no extended family or kids of her own. So now an attorney was the executor. My wife was due a year's salary and a tea set and a photograph of them both. And we discovered that youngest in her will forgave the debt we had just been resued over. We get the payment, happy times. We saved it for a house down payment. By now I had started my main careers. A few months later we are sued again for not paying. What? We were forgiven? Nope, not from the second judgment. With new penalties, it was the entire award. We paid as that was unexpected money to us. But I can't feel like the second suing was with knowledge of the forgiveness clause, and the first with knowledge of the payout. Thanks to everyone who was here today. See you tomorrow on new videos. Bye-bye.